I'm gonna give folks a moment to drop into the live stream today, webinar, and then we'll get our intros going and get started. Thank you all for joining us today. Awesome. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to another edition of All Tech is Humans webinar series, where we dig into thorny tech and society issues in meaningful conversations shaping our responsible tech future. I'm Sandra Khalil. I'm the Associate Director of All Tech is Human. If you're new here, welcome. All Tech is Human is a nonprofit organization committed to building the relational infrastructure, sustaining the responsible tech ecosystem. We're connecting diverse voices, we're surfacing interdisciplinary insights in tech, and we try to help people break into and grow within the responsible tech space. Whether you're coming from tech or policy or academia, advocacy, or a creative field, there's absolutely a seat for you at this table. Our webinars happen bi-weekly, and they're just one way that you can get involved and spark conversation about tech in your community. If you're looking to get more involved, you can join our very vibrant Slack community. It's 13,000 strong and growing, and it's filled with people working across disciplines and sectors caring about responsible tech. You can also attend one of our upcoming gatherings. We have curated US-based convenings. We have virtual discussions like this one. And we also have, ATIHX meetups across different cities, like Boston, Cambridge, which Theo is so, we're so lucky to have Theo be an organizer for that ATIHX group. You could bring it to your community, and we have guidelines around ATIHX. If you ever want to learn more, please check out the page on our website and reach out to us with any questions. Today's talk is a fascinating one. Alisar, Theo, myself, and so many others have just come back from TrustCon 2025. Huge thanks to TSPA, the entire team putting it together. They did an incredible job, and it was one of the most memorable TrustCons for me personally. Today we'll be talking about our takeaways from those discussions, from the sessions, and getting Alisar and Theo's take on what's coming next. Please be sure to drop your questions either in the chat or the Q&A function. We'll definitely reserve some time at the end for those. And yeah, stay engaged. Let us know where you're joining from. Let us know what you're interested in talking about, and we'll get started with our discussion. So I'm so grateful to have our two panelists on today. We have Alisar Mustafa, the head of AI policy at Duco, and Theodora Skeadas, the community policy manager at DoorDash, as well as proudly the chair of ATIH's board. So thank you both for joining us today. How are you doing? Would you like to give a quick intro and reflections on your most memorable takeaway from TrustCon? Feel free to jump in.
Sure, happy to. So I have quite a few thoughts from TrustCon. So for folks who don't know, this was the fourth iteration of this conference, and it has evolved tremendously over the last few years. The first year was very small, just a few hundred people. The second year was a little bit bigger. And then the last year had about 1,400 people, which is the space's capacity. So it's going to stay. And this year, I believe the same, about 1,400 people. What I've noticed over the last several years, and it was certainly visible this year, was that TrustCon has continued to attract a wider range of attendees. So I saw folks from companies that aren't just YouTube and TikTok and Meta, but also companies like eBay, Pinterest, Partners in Health, Thumbtack, Fox, Activision, Blizzard Entertainment, Optum, which is a healthcare services company, and others. In addition to a wider range of I also saw folks working from across trust and safety more broadly construed. This includes folks who are very active in operationalizing the rules of trust and safety within their organizations, which I didn't notice in previous iterations. of the conference quite as much. And it's also more cross-sectoral. So this means that not only are we seeing company representatives, we're also seeing folks from civil society like Thorn, Violence Prevention Network, and GIFCT, the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism, as well folks from UK Ofcom or EU's European Commission, Australia's e-safety commission are also attending. So a wider range of attendees. And at the same time, the challenges are growing as well. So the threats, the threat landscape is evolving. Just a few days ago, for example, the US Department of Justice published a report, or sorry, the House Judiciary Committee rather published a report how the European Union's Digital Services Act compels global censorship and infringes on American free speech, which details how the European Union, under the DSA as a censorship tool, requires social media companies to engage in discourse, but also censorship. And so the new framing is understandably and the larger ecosystem changing how people are showing up. I noticed self-censorship, particularly for people who are without US citizenship communities, and in particular, certain human rights conversations, including issues around surveillance, Palestine, and others, were often relegated to side conversations, but weren't hosted on the main floors. And then I guess I'll wrap up by saying that um, there's a real emphasis on professionalization, a real focus on how to do this work. So, for example, I attended sessions on operationalizing taxonomies of online harm in structure and resource allocation, or best practices in the design and management of content review systems, team structures, and investigative strategies for offline harm, things that are very tangible. And so I think that what I'm seeing in this particular iteration of the conference and in general is sort of a continued professionalization of the field amidst the challenges that are evolving.
Thank you, Theo. Alisar, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Theo. It was really good takeaways. So I think like I will highlight kind of maybe my main or biggest takeaway from TrustCon was that like there was a huge focus on like the critical importance of like hyper localization in trust and safety and policy. And I saw that across, a lot of my sessions, but also conversations I've had with people around like global majority perspectives, that really highlighted how concepts we think are universal, like human rights frameworks, or even like the definitions we have of like what harmful content is, like what constitutes NCII, or non-consensual imagery. Intimate imagery actually requires kind of deep contextual understanding when, especially when you're operating across a lot of different markets and countries, which is like what most people have. And so, what constitutes harmful content in the US might present completely different risks and user experiences and expectations in other markets, given like different legal frameworks, any social norms, and user behaviors that are specific to that area. And this particularly resonated like strongly with my work in like AI policy and safety, as we're grappling with like similar challenges around how do we fine tune models to be both like safe and also accurate and not biased across global contexts, especially when you're thinking about, low resourced languages.
That was a particularly striking topic for me at TrustCon, just how to have better resources for the various languages that are on these platforms. Theo, I know you supported a workshop on that discussion. It was a prevalent discussion across TrustCon, but I'm curious to know, like, what conclusions did you arrive at in that workshop with TrustCon attendees?
Are you asking me or Theo for her?
No, me, sorry, I was just unmuting. Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I, as well as two others, Rachel Fagan and Sujata, organized a session on language equity in AI content moderation. And so what we talked about was how themes around language equity metrics, data diversity, technical solutions, and also policy implications. A big part of the conversation was actually just focused on defining language equity. So what does it even mean? Because it means different things to so, for example, is it about representation or culturally sensitive policy, availability of data, language nomenclature? Um, all of these things impact language equity in different ways. And then we transitioned from a conversation on defining to measuring language equity. So we talked about minimum quality or good enough for the user, available communication, different ways of measuring where language equity shows up or where it doesn't. And we talked about specific efforts in practice. So what is being done today to measure language equity and to improve and bolster language equity? What can we do better together? And also where have failings taken place and what can we learn from those failures?
Alisar, you also presented on US state level AI regulation. What do trust and safety teams need to know? What were your takeaways from that?
Yeah, so my presentation focused on, like you said, US state level AI regulation. I walked through kind of the specific current landscape. There's around, 1,000 AI related bills that have been introduced across 45 US states, and roughly 170 have been signed into a law. We talked about the core harms that states are prioritizing, which were, NCII, election manipulation, algorithmic discrimination, high risk systems, and a lot of consumer transparency issues, with kind of the main compliance themes that these states are requiring are compliance requirements, so responding to risks and harms like pretty fast, infrastructure requirements, so building new systems like tools for watermarking, synthetic media, a lot of documentation requirements, such as documented data sources from back to 2022, and liability management. And I structured it around the AI lifecycle, so following kind of compliance requirements from input to output. So we covered California's training data, transparency requirements, like I mentioned, having to document your data sources from 2022, Colorado's risk assessment mandates for high risk AI systems, and like I mentioned, the California's watermarking detection tools, obligations, and platform content moderation requirements for things like election deepfakes. And I think what really seemed to resonate to the audience and the questions that I've got after was breaking down that compliance pattern. People really enjoyed also that actionable steps. So rather than just explaining what the law says, just giving like specific timelines and next steps for different team types and different trust and safety teams versus like the legal teams, because there's a differentiation there.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Humane Intelligence, who Theo is also affiliated with. They released a report in partnership with the FCDO. Theo, what can you share about that report and what's to come?
Yeah, so I like this example because it's a good example of cross-sectoral collaboration in a time when that is becoming harder. So we worked with the UK Foreign Commonwealth Development Office and also were supported by the Department of Science, Innovation, and Technology to look at intimate image abuse, which is a very pernicious and pervasive form of technology facilitated gender-based violence that disproportionately affects women, girls, LGBTQI people, and increasingly also boys and young men. This report was researched throughout the fall of last year, and also we undertook workshops in Lagos, Nigeria, and Bogota, Colombia, which fed into the insights. So I'll drop a link to the report. We launched on Monday of last week at the British consulate. So it was a side event, like a breakfast event, just as the conference was getting started. But a really interesting conversation about how government, civil society, and companies can work together better to address this particularly important issue. And I'll also flag that Humane Intelligence on the third day of the conference, the last slot as well, organized a red teaming event from AI red teaming in practice. So myself, Sarah Amos, and Jen Whedon organized a workshop on red teaming and threat modeling techniques. And specifically, we broke folks up into two different themes, virtual therapy and history, or asking the historian, an educational assistant, and red teamed models around those two themes, and then came together and talked about what we had learned. So very interesting and very hands-on.
Yeah, on the topic of hands-on, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that All Tech is Human is working with Cornell Tech, who just recently took on the Trust and Safety Research Consortium, which I'm a proud member of. We're working with our partners there to put on a trust and safety sort of careers event October 1st. So if that's something of interest to any of the attendees on this call, please keep your eyes open for an interest form in the coming days. I think it'll be, really good to get more of these perspectives on stage to learn how people can make it a real impact in trust and safety from the various backgrounds and sectors that we've mentioned so far on this call. So definitely look out for that. And thank you for sharing the report, Theo. Um, I would be remiss if I didn't mention I attended a panel that really you know it really resonated with me. We've just released this AI companions and chatbots resource in partnership with Rose Gingrich, our Princeton fellow, who's awesome, and you should definitely check her work out. But yeah, I attended Connected Yet Alone, which was a talk about AI companions and chatbots. You know, what are the pros? What are the cons? What are the things that we don't know? Um, and the real theme of it was we need more longitudinal long-term data to support conclusions that we're making about these chatbots. There are pros and cons to its use, absolutely. And I think what we're seeing in the media today is a lot of the really egregious outcomes of chatbot use. They talked about safeguards, what needs to be put in place, especially for vulnerable populations like children. Um, and also just the not dismissing the ability of a chatbot or an AI companion to really stimulate relationships outside of that engagement and outside of that virtual engagement. And also the suicide mitigation, the harm mitigation aspect of being in companionship with a chatbot. I found it super interesting. I think that the stimulation of relationships and connection is promising for what I view as, and what many are saying is a loneliness epidemic post-COVID. So I'm curious to see how this sort of develops. I think Kim Malfacini from OpenAI was a great speaker on that call and on that panel, and we've had her on previous live streams in the past. I'm curious to see what direction this space goes in, and definitely be on the lookout for ATIH's contributions to that, because it is definitely top of mind for us. Moving on, I would love to ask you both if, you had more time at the conference. It feels like everything is bunched together, really, really jam-packed sessions and networking and engagement. If you had more time, what's one session you would have loved to attend, or, something that you would have loved to do that you really didn't find yourself having the time to?
I think I really wish I could have attended more of the roundtables and workshop sessions. I would say like my favorite kind of conversations or sessions were either those or even like conversations on like the margins of the conference and kind of like smaller convos, like even with both of you two, right? Like I got to get to know you so much better than just like knowing you online or seeing you in like casual convos otherwise. And I think, those like smaller interactive formats were incredibly valuable. And I think like especially for people on the call that are maybe looking to get into the field, I always tell people you should definitely go into these kind of spaces and get like hands-on learning experience, which is what I feel like I always get from these conversations where you could really dig into how, other organizations are solving the same problem you've been wrestling with, like since the beginning of your career, essentially, and someone would like describe how their approach like to a challenge was and how, and kind of immediately you could see like how that applies to your own work. And like ask them follow-up questions and actually workshop solutions together. I think that was very valuable and I wish I had like more time. I mean, 3 days is packed and like very short, but I think like a learning for me for next time is to kind of be a little bit more intentional around that. And I love that this year they had, I think this was the first year they've introduced like the roundtables, I believe, and that was just like an amazing addition. I hope that continues to happen. And also like the events. Like I think you like All Tech is Human threw an amazing event, great food, and I was like I just met so many really awesome people there. And I think I also love those like as much as like you're so exhausted by the end of the day, you still kind of somehow find the energy and it actually energizes you even more when you go to these events and see people. So yeah, I think those are all things I wish I could do more of.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was so grateful to partner with Google's safety team on that event, and Duco also held a great event. I'm not just saying that. It was a very
Thank
it
you.
was fun to be in community with you all. Theo, I think you had something to share as well.
just a plus one. I mean, it was a very hectic few days because the conference is 3 days. And I think in past years it had been Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but this time it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, which just felt like it further consolidates. And so sometimes I know many of us were like triple booked between events. In particular, the one session that I would have wanted to attend that I didn't get a chance to was Leah Ferrantinos's AI agents session. It was so popular that they actually asked her to do it 2 times. I tried to go the second time, but it was full. So I might have gotten there a little bit earlier if I had known. But I think agents is a issue of the day and something I'm keen to learn more about, especially as organizations like moving towards implementation. And so, yeah, I think in general, attending more of the sessions, there was so many great sessions, but not enough time to attend everything.
Yeah, I totally plus one that. I think Leah did a great job in her AI agent session. Um, Moving forward to like the forward-looking aspect of this discussion, I'd love to know from both of you what emerging trends in trust and safety are you tracking, and what do you think needs more attention going forward? Theo, you just mentioned the topic of agents. Is there anything else you're looking at that you think is going to require our attention moving forward?
Yeah, good question. I do think that the issue of agents is a big one. I'll drop a link in the chat. I'm currently attending this event at Stanford, which is bringing together industry players to talk about challenges and opportunities with agents. I also think that red teaming, right, evaluating AI models for different kinds of harm like factuality, bias, and misdirection is something that will continue to proliferate, and I'm excited to see more of that. In terms of upcoming events, I'm excited about the UNGA period, the UN General Assembly period, which we're getting ready for in September in New York City. All of the All Tech is Human conversations that'll be happening over August and into September and October, I think are good ones. And then just in general, I think I'm keeping an eye out for mental health, loneliness, which you mentioned earlier, labor force changes, automation, and then the changing context that we find ourselves in, which influences all of the work we're doing. To Tyler's well-framed question.
Yeah, and I want to double click also on the kind of the red teaming and fine tuning piece as well, because it's a lot of the work that I do. And I think there's a lot of like complexities around like how do you ensure and a lot of like kind of like it's just a lot of the work do I do like personally in like helping companies like fine tune models for safety and for also like having accurate information, especially when there's like global events or like global geopolitical conflict that is happening, and how do you get models to respond like accurately, but also not in a biased way. And I think like bridging that work of like policy, like, okay, we're writing policy that says we need to do that, but then how do you actually have that technical implementation and like gather people to do that kind of work is going to continue to be really important from that like human perspective. I think like another interesting trend that I saw at the conference is how trust and safety teams are really grappling with like this completely new landscape where both the content they're moderating and tools they're using are increasingly AI powered. So on one side, you have that challenge of like moderating AI generated content at scale. So like thinking about deepfakes, synthetic text, AI generated imagery that might violate policies. And a lot of these traditional detection methods weren't necessarily built for this scale. So, what's also interesting is how the trust and safety workflows themselves are evolving and how teams are integrating AI tools into their moderation pipelines. And I think what I'm interested in seeing, and I have no answer for this, is how we're kind of building these tools, how are we auditing them, how are we making sure they work correctly. But yeah, I think those are the two things that I'm looking forward to exploring a little bit more in the few upcoming years.
I know we received a couple of questions. I'd love to share them with you. Novak said, was the topic of trust and safety literacy and education for business users and senior managers discussed? The topic of trust and safety literacy and education for business users and senior managers.
I don't think there was a session, and I may have missed it. And I'll drop
Yeah.
the agenda chat, but I don't think there was a session on like literacy and education in that specific way. But what I would say is like everything is about literacy and education for different user groups and in different contexts. Like the whole conference is educational, focused on different aspects of trust and safety. But I don't think there was like a TNS 101 for business execs. I don't think it is that high level. I think it's all more granular.
Totally agree with that sentiment. I also want to flag another question from John. What kind of opportunities do you foresee for professionals impacted by layoffs in trust and safety as the field evolves? What skills would you recommend we have to get a foot in the door or help advance the work? And these are folks impacted by government and nonprofit layoffs.
I always say I think there's a lot of opportunities to work. I think maybe Thea will have a lot more kind of to say on this too. But I think like there is a lot of really valuable skills that people would bring in if you're like particularly if you're looking into like getting into industry and if that's the interest. I think there's a lot of like need for that within industry as well, and I think that could be very transferable. In terms of skills, and I don't know if this is relevant for like more of senior people, but I always tell people who are entering the field to have some guy, like it's really good to have a mix of like some just foundational technical experience that I wish I kind of like learned a little bit more earlier in my career. And I don't mean like literally learn how to code, but I think understanding particularly around AI, like how it works, how the models work, and then it would help me a lot to kind of build out policies from there.
Yeah, so I'll just talk through the docs that I've been littering in the chat. So one is I just dropped my own, I just took very the sessions that I attended. They're Chatham House, so not attributional, but I've dropped those in the chat. You're welcome to check them out. I've been hosting these recurring monthly-ish conversations on pathways into tech policy, and we've done some with All Tech is Human before. Oh, yes, my pleasure, Tamara. And so I've dropped the notes from the most recent one. You're also welcome to check out the video recording. And so one thing I note is that for folks who are looking to find a foothold in this space, who may have been government or other related spaces, looking at alternate approaches. And I say alternative employers. What I mean is just like if you're going to look at OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, those are going to be very hard jobs to get. You typically need a referral, maybe several. Thousands of people are applying for every single job. Looking at organizations that are very active in tech, but maybe not mainstream in the same way, Visa, American Express, Adobe, Motorola Solutions can be a way. Also, consulting firms are in EU regulation compliance or other elements of this space. So Accenture, KPMG, those can be employers, vendors as well. So Persona, Double Verify, Hive AI, they're very active in this space. They might not be the platforms, but they work closely with the platforms. And then broadening one's approach in terms of function. So compliance, operations, marketing, design strategy, et cetera. These are other ways of accessing the space, being a part of a way that's a little more feasible.
I also will say think tanks are also a great space if you're into research. I know a lot of my friends have kind of joined think tanks and they're great and I'm happy to kind of like provide a list as well.
Thank you both. That takes us right at time. I'm just making sure. Do you think there is a focus on building more community-centric social media, or is that not a hot topic in the TNS industry? Theo, you're typing an answer. Okay, great.
Sure.
Yeah, go for
Oh,
it.
I think it's a tough question. I mean, certainly organizations like Blue Sky that have popped up in the aftermath of Twitter turned X are really big spaces for gathering and conversation. But I don't know that I think like the transformative impact of AI was probably the hottest. That and then like stuff like changing political paradigms are probably the hot, and how people are adapting are probably the hottest topics, I think.
Absolutely. And super quickly, I'll say to this anonymous attendee asking about trust and safety being an academic world, do they need a higher ed degree? They worked at Hinge at the height of its use in 2020 to 2022. I would say your network is really going to bring you far in these times. Just as Theo said, you need referrals to get into those big companies. I think just really activating, your past colleagues, your current network in trust and safety, it'll take you far and it'll give you the insights that you need to break into the space that you're looking to break into at this time. So really go for it with that network and don't be afraid to ask for help. And that puts us at time. Thank you so much for both of your time today. Please stay in touch with us and tune in to our live stream tomorrow on the AI Action Plan with Rebecca Tweed, our Executive Director. I'm Sandra Khalil. This is goodbye for now. Thank you so much. Cheers.